When you both stopped trying, something quietly shifted between you, and part of you has been sitting with that shift ever since, wondering exactly when it happened, wondering if it was real, and wondering whether what you felt was ever truly felt on the other side too. There is a specific kind of ache that comes with this. It is not the sharp pain of a dramatic ending. It is not the loud slam of a door. It is something slower, something quieter, something that settles into the chest like a weight you did not notice accumulating, until one day you realized you were carrying it everywhere. You carry it to work. You carry it into rooms full of other people. You carry it into the silence before you fall asleep. And in that silence, you replay moments. You look for the exact second things changed. You search your own memory like it holds evidence of something you almost understand but cannot quite name. This is not you being too sensitive. This is not you holding on too long or reading too much into things. Psychology shows that when two people share a genuine emotional bond and that bond begins to quietly dissolve, the human mind does not simply move on. It registers the loss at a deep neurological level, the same way it would register any disruption to something it had come to rely on. Your nervous system learned this person. Your patterns adjusted around them. Your sense of normal was quietly shaped by their presence. So when that presence began to shift, when the trying began to fade on both sides, your entire internal world felt it, even before your conscious mind was ready to admit what was happening. What you are feeling right now is not weakness. It is not obsession. It is the completely natural, psychologically documented response of a person who genuinely connected with another human being and is now navigating the strange, aching territory of what comes after something unfinished. And what makes this particular kind of grief so difficult is that there was no clean ending. There was no conversation that closed the door. There was just the slow withdrawal of effort, the replies that came a little later, the plans that were made a little less often, the silences that grew a little longer. And somewhere inside both of you, because this is the truth you feel, even if you have never said it aloud, you both sensed it, you both felt the tide going out, and neither of you reached out to stop it. And that moment, the moment you both stopped trying, did not come from nowhere. Psychology tells us that this kind of mutual withdrawal almost never begins with indifference. It begins with fear. One person pulls back just slightly because they are afraid of being too much, or because something in them began to feel uncertain, or because vulnerability became too uncomfortable to sustain. And the other person, sensing that withdrawal, even unconsciously, begins to pull back too. Not because they stopped caring, but because reaching toward someone who seems to be retreating feels like the most terrifying thing in the world when you are not sure they will reach back. So, the trying fades, not because the connection was not real, but because both of you were protecting yourselves from the pain of being the only one still reaching. And there is something both heartbreaking and profoundly human about that. Two people who may have cared deeply, standing just close enough to feel each other's warmth, but just far enough apart that neither one could feel safe enough to close the distance. You have probably asked yourself whether you should have done something differently, whether you should have said more or said it sooner, or been willing to be vulnerable in a way that felt impossibly risky at the time. And here is what psychology understands about that question. The answer is not as simple as yes or no, and it is certainly not a verdict on your worth or your capacity to love. The timing of human connection is not entirely in any one person's control. There are internal worlds you could not see. There were fears and wounds in that other person that had nothing to do with you, just as your own fears and wounds had roots that predated them entirely. What shifted between you was not just behavior, it was energy. It was the invisible current that runs between two people when they are both fully present, both fully willing, both quietly choosing each other in the small daily ways that build something real. When that current began to flicker, you felt it in ways that words were never quite adequate to describe. A slightly different tone in a message, a moment of laughter that felt just slightly performed, a hug that was warm but somehow not quite as close as it used to be. These are not imagined details. These are the emotional microdata that human beings are extraordinarily sensitive to, particularly when they care deeply about the person they are reading. Some people would say that what you both needed was better communication. And perhaps on the surface, that is true. But underneath the surface, something more ancient was at work. There is a part of every human being that waits to feel chosen, not asked, not negotiated with, not reassured through logic, but genuinely, unmistakably chosen. And when that feeling began to fade, when the choosing became less visible, less consistent, less felt, both of you began, slowly and silently, to prepare for a loss you were not yet ready to name. That preparation looked like distance. It looked like less effort. It looked from the outside like two people simply drifting, but inside. Inside, it was something much more tender than indifference. It was grief moving ahead of its own announcement. You deserve to be chosen, not tolerated, not kept around out of comfort or habit or the fear of something unfamiliar. You deserve to be in the presence of someone who makes their choice visible, who reaches back when you reach, who stays present when presence is hard, who sees your depth and does not flinch from it. If that was not what you were experiencing, then the shift that happened between you was painful, yes, but it was also pointing you somewhere true. Your feelings are not too much. Let that settle for a moment, because so many people who have sat with this kind of quiet grief have been made to feel somewhere along the way that they wanted too much, felt too much, needed too much. But emotional depth is not a flaw. It is not a burden you should apologize for. It is one of the most extraordinary things about you. The fact that you feel the current between people, the fact that you notice when something shifts, the fact that you are willing to sit with an ache rather than pretend it is not there. That is not weakness. That is a form of emotional honesty that very few people have the courage to practice. And your silence, the fact that you held back, the fact that you did not chase or beg or force something that was already withdrawing, that was not cowardice. It was not giving up. It was a kind of dignity that you extended to both yourself and to them. There is wisdom in knowing when to hold your ground quietly. There is strength in choosing not to perform vulnerability for someone who is no longer fully present to receive it. Your silence was not the absence of love. It was love protecting itself. The moment you both stopped trying was not the end of your story. It was a moment of truth, and truth, however uncomfortable, is always the beginning of something that belongs more completely to who you actually are. If this touched something in you today, you are not alone in feeling it. There is an entire community here. People just like you, who feel deeply, who grieve quietly, and who are finding their way through. Subscribe to Psychology Wisdom so you never have to sit with these feelings without something to hold on to. Leave a like if this gave a name to something you have been carrying. And come back whenever you need to be reminded that what you feel is real, it is valid, and you are not too much. You are exactly enough.